silent language of control. What 16th-century manipulation manuals reveal about modern rulers. They taught me to smile while concealing daggers, to extend my hand in friendship while my other hand maps the quickest path to your throat. Power has never spoken its true intentions aloud. When Niccolò Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both, he wasn't merely offering advice to a 16th-century Italian prince. He was documenting a language, the ancient, unspoken dialect of control that resonates through the marble halls of the Renaissance and echoes into our glass towers of today. I've spent years studying these whispers, these manuscripts of manipulation, the handbooks that powerful men kept locked away, but consulted nightly like Bibles. You believe power has evolved? That the mechanisms of control have become more sophisticated, more humane? History doesn't transform. It disguises. When a modern ruler stands before a sea of cameras, presenting compassion with practiced precision, that is Machiavelli's prince wearing democracy as a costume. When technology companies harvest your desires while promising convenience, that is Castiglione's courtier flattering while he schemes. These Renaissance tacticians documented the architecture of influence with brutal honesty. They revealed the machinery behind the theater of leadership. The question that haunts me, that should haunt all of us, is whether anything fundamental has truly changed. Consider the art of appearing virtuous while acting according to necessity. Machiavelli writes, "A prince must learn how not to be good, and to use this knowledge or not to use it according to necessity." Now listen to any press conference following a corporate scandal or governmental failure. Hear how they express regret without accepting responsibility, how they investigate themselves, how they pivot to future promises while the bodies are still warm. This is not coincidence. This is curriculum. The manipulation manuals taught that perception overrules reality. Baldassare Castiglione, in the Book of the Courtier, revealed how those seeking power must cultivate sprezzatura, the art of making difficult actions seem effortless and natural. The illusion that influence comes not from calculation, but from inherent superiority. Sound familiar? It should. When tech billionaires present themselves as casual geniuses rather than ruthless strategists, this is sprezzatura. When politicians claim decisions came from the heart rather than from polling data, this is sprezzatura. The studied casualness of power that conceals the machinery of ambition. The 16th century gave us the playbook. The 21st century merely digitized it. Giovanni Della Cosa's Galatio taught that controlling others requires first controlling your appearance. That manners are weapons. That etiquette is armor. That social graces are not courtesies, but technologies of influence. How different is this from our modern obsession with personal branding? With curated social media personas? With leadership presence consultants who charge thousands to teach executives how to stand, how to modulate their voices, how to time their smiles? These are not superficialities. These are the grammar of control. When Renaissance princes were instructed to keep enemies close but counselors closer, they were being taught surveillance. When they learned to make examples of dissenters swiftly and publicly, they were being taught information control. When they studied how to distribute favors sparingly but praise generously, they were being taught behavioral conditioning. And we call ourselves free. We call ourselves informed. We call ourselves autonomous. The most insidious insight these manuals offered was psychological. They understood that true power comes not from forcing people to obey, but from making them want to obey, from constructing realities where compliance feels like choice. Machiavelli tells his prince to avoid being hated not from moral concern, but because hatred makes subjects resistant to manipulation. He advises maintaining bread and circuses, public spectacles and basic provisions, not for the welfare of citizens, but to prevent them from focusing too intently on who controls their lives. Today we have endless entertainment, manufactured outrage, artificial divisions, and algorithm-fed information bubbles. The circus has never been more elaborate, its purpose never more the same. The 16th century handbooks understood something profound about humanity that we prefer to deny, that we are susceptible beings. that our perceptions can be architected, that our autonomy has vulnerabilities that skilled operators can exploit. Let me read directly from Machiavelli's text. Men are so simple of mind, and so much dominated by their immediate needs, that a deceitful man will always find plenty who are ready to be deceived. 5 centuries later, with all our education, all our technology, all our supposed sophistication, has this fundamental calculation changed? Or have the techniques simply adapted to our evolving psychologies? The manipulation manuals teach us that power speaks a language most cannot hear, that control operates through gestures most do not recognize, that influence moves through channels most never examine. And this invisible machinery continues to function because of a simple truth. We prefer comfortable illusions to uncomfortable realities. We choose not to see the strings, because acknowledging them would force us to question everything. The prince who builds hospitals while waging wars. The corporation that promotes diversity while exploiting labor. The platform that promises connection while harvesting attention. These contradictions aren't failures of consistency. They are deliberate applications of the dual strategy that Machiavelli prescribed. Be the lion and the fox. Show strength where necessary and cunning where possible. This is why whistleblowers and leakers face such severe consequences. Not merely for the information they reveal, but for the glimpse they provide into the machinery. For the momentary lifting of the veil. I study these ancient texts not as historical curiosities, but as living documents. As the original source code for systems of control that have been refined and optimized, but never fundamentally rewritten. When Machiavelli advised his prince to perform cruelty all at once, but distribute benefits gradually, he wasn't merely addressing the tactical concerns of a minor Italian duchy. He was documenting a psychological insight about how humans process pain and pleasure, loss and gain. Insights that modern behavioral economics has only recently caught up to understanding. But perhaps most disturbing is how these texts reveal the performance of leadership, the calculated theatricality of it. Giovanni Botero, in The Reason of State, advises rulers to stage-manage public appearances, to choreograph seemingly spontaneous interactions with subjects, to craft moments of apparent vulnerability that actually consolidate authority. Watch how modern leaders spontaneously stop their motorcades to embrace children. How they happen upon everyday citizens in carefully pre-scouted locations. How they share candid moments that teams of image consultants have meticulously planned. This isn't connection. This is calculated manipulation, wearing the mask of authenticity. The Renaissance manuals understood something crucial about sustaining control. That people will accept nearly any amount of exploitation if they believe two things. That it is inevitable, and that resistance would bring something worse. This is why these texts emphasize creating dependency. This is why they stress the importance of eliminating alternatives. This is why they insist on controlling the stories people tell themselves about their place in the world. Bread and circuses, yes, but also carefully cultivated fear. Fear of enemies outside. Fear of disorder within. Fear of losing status. Fear of being left behind. Does this sound archaic? Or does it sound like every news headline, every campaign speech, every corporate restructuring announcement you've encountered? Guicciardini wrote in his Maxims that the art of leadership is making people believe they have chosen what you have already decided for them. That sovereignty ultimately rests on manufacturing consent. The 16th century manuals of manipulation didn't seek to eliminate human agency. They sought to redirect it, to harness it, to channel autonomous beings toward predetermined outcomes while preserving the illusion of choice. And now, with psychographic targeting, with behavioral prediction algorithms, with attention engineering and preference-shaping technologies that those Renaissance princes could only dream of, has the underlying philosophy changed? Or has it merely found more efficient tools? Here is the question that haunts me. If Machiavelli's prince had access to your search history, your consumption patterns, your social connections mapped and quantified, what additional chapters might he have written? If Castiglione's courtier could analyze not just your public behavior, but your private doubts, your intimate relationships, your unguarded moments, how much more effectively could he position himself as your trusted advisor? These texts reveal something profound about power across centuries. That true control doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. The most effective forms of manipulation are those we participate in willingly. those we internalize, those we defend as our own choices. The brilliance of these manipulation manuals, and the systems they spawned, is that they don't just control behavior. They shape the very frameworks through which we interpret our experiences. They don't just tell us what to think. They structure how we think. When Machiavelli advised his prince to appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright, while being prepared to act against these virtues, he wasn't merely advocating hypocrisy. He was documenting how moral language itself becomes a tool of control when divorced from moral commitment. Consider how often we hear words like freedom, reform, progress, security from those in power. These are not descriptive terms but operative ones. They don't describe reality, they create it. They don't convey information, they shape perception. This is the legacy of the manipulation manuals, the weaponization of meaning itself. I'm not suggesting a conspiracy. I'm describing a convergence. When incentives align around certain techniques of control, similar strategies emerge independently. The 16th century texts didn't create these dynamics, they documented what works. And what worked then works now, because human psychology has constants. Because we remain vulnerable to the same cognitive biases. Because we continue to seek safety in hierarchy, certainty in authority, and identity in belonging. The manuals knew this. Modern rulers know this. The question is, when will we know this? There's a moment in Machiavelli's letters, not in The Prince, but in his personal correspondence, where he admits that the tools of statecraft he documented are not inevitable, that they flourish in particular conditions, that they require specific types of subjects to be effective. He writes, "When all men are good, your precepts would be harmful, but as they are wicked and would not observe their faith with you, you are not bound to keep faith with them." This is the escape clause hidden within the manipulation manuals themselves. They work because we let them. They succeed because we enable them. They persist because we fulfill our prescribed roles. What would happen if we studied these texts not as victims, but as informed citizens? If we learned to recognize the techniques being deployed against us? If we developed literacy in the silent language of control? What would happen if, when we saw the performance of authenticity, we demanded actual authenticity? If, when we encountered the stagecraft of leadership, we insisted on genuine accountability? What would happen if we refused the roles these systems have assigned to us? The 16th century manipulation manuals weren't merely describing techniques of control. They were documenting a relationship, a dance between those who seek to rule and those who consent to be ruled. A choreography that requires participation from both sides to succeed. And choreographies can be disrupted. Dances can be declined. Scripts can be rewritten. When Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both, he was not simply offering tactical advice. He was revealing a fundamental insecurity at the heart of power, that it ultimately depends on our responses. That even the most skillful manipulator requires our participation in our own manipulation. This is both the most disturbing insight from these ancient texts and, paradoxically, the most liberating. The machinery of control, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately requires our compliance to function. So study these manuals. Learn their lessons not to exploit others, but to recognize when these techniques are being deployed against you. Develop fluency in this silent language not to speak it, but to resist when it is spoken to you. Because the final truth these manipulation manuals reveal is that power's greatest fear, in the 16th century and today, is not rebellion. It is literacy. Not resistance, but recognition. Not defiance, but awareness. Machiavelli's prince fears nothing more than subjects who can read his playbook, who can see the performance for what it is, who can hear the silent language of control and respond not with the lines they've been given, but with words of their own choosing. It is indeed better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But it is better still to be understood, because what is understood can be questioned. What is questioned can be changed. And what can be changed is no longer inevitable.